Yaeko Iwasaki's Enlightenment Letters to HARADA-ROSHI and His Comments. Editor's Introduction. No name shines with greater luster in the history of modern Japanese Zen Buddhism than that of a 25-year-old girl, Yaeko Iwasaki, who became enlightened after some 5 years of zazen, largely from a sickbed, and then, in the succeeding 5 days, deepened this realization to a degree rare in present-day Japan. A week later, fulfilling her own premonitions, she was dead. In India she would undoubtedly have been heralded as a saint and worshipped by thousands. In Japan the story of her intrepid life and its crowning achievement is scarcely known outside Zen circles. These are the letters she wrote. In December 1935. To her preceptor, Zen Master THIၤN Sogaku Harada, then 65 years old, relating what she perceived, felt, and thought during those 5 epic days, together with his cogent comments. Not many personal documents in religious literature, we believe, are as poignant or as eloquently revealing of the profoundly enlightened mind as these letters. Though few in number and relatively brief, they convey the very essence of living Buddhism. They abound in paradox and overflow with gratitude, qualities which unfailingly mark off deep spiritual experience from the shallower levels of insight. And woven through them is a thread of singular purity. An ardent yearning to achieve full enlightenment not for her own sake, but that others too might attain self-fulfillment and lasting inner peace through her efforts to make known the Buddha's way. Her untimely death. Untimely only as we ordinarily calculate a lifespan, has not ended her karmic destiny to make known the Dharma. If anything, it bids fair to give it new impetus, for in HARADA-ROSHI's words, her courageous life is so inspiring and its influence so far-reaching that it is certain to promote the spread of Buddhism and benefit humankind. Quote, as a scion of the founder of the wealthy Mitsubishi Industrial Combine, Yaeko Iwasaki had everything money could buy except health. At the age of 2 she was so seriously ill she almost died, and the resultant impairment of her heart valves left her with a frail body for the rest of her brief life. Unable to withstand the demands of daily attendance at school, she was tutored at home until she was almost 11, at which time, having become somewhat stronger, she was enrolled in the equivalent of junior high school. Despite her inability to participate in a number of school activities, she completed junior as well as senior high school with a host of friends and an excellent scholastic record. Her keen, lively mind, her joyous, sunny disposition, and her generous spirit earned for her the admiration and love of her classmates. Upon graduation she commenced the study of flower arrangements and tea ceremony, the traditional Japanese arts through which serenity and gentleness of spirit are cultivated, and then began to learn cooking and to study the piano, all as preparation for eventual marriage and motherhood. But her karma was to lead her abruptly in another direction. At about the age of 20 she began to cough blood, and tuberculosis was diagnosed. Her doctor sent her to bed and ordered complete rest for 2 to 3 years. Very likely this prolonged inactivity, in its effect on her physical and psychic being, developed within her a sensitivity which was crucial to her rich spiritual flowering. More immediately, what propelled her towards Zen was a sudden development involving her father, whom she deeply loved. He was told he had a heart condition which could prove fatal at any time, and becoming gripped by the fear of sudden death, he attended a lecture by HARADA-ROSHI on this most fundamental human anxiety and how it could be dissolved through zazen and, ultimately, enlightenment. So convinced was Yako's father by what he heard that he became a disciple of HARADA-ROSHI and in his own home began to practice zazen. Since his heart condition precluded regular attendance at session, he prevailed upon HARADA-ROSHI to come to his home once a month, on the Roshi's regular trip to Tokyo, to give a lecture and private instructions to his family and friends. With a zeal born of his overwhelming fear of death, Yako's father devoted himself to zazen and in less than a year attained kensho. This experience banished all his fears and brought him such an upsurge of vitality and self-confidence that he once more took up his duties as the head of the family's large industrial enterprise. But with an unwise vigor. The strain proved too much for him, and one day without warning he died of a heart attack. The appalling suddenness of her father's death brought home with dramatic force to the still bedridden Yaeko the evanescence of life and the stark reality of death, precipitating her into the most searching reflections on the meaning of human existence. Up to her father's enlightenment she had been hearing HARADA-ROSHI's monthly lecture at her home, but as yet with no desire to receive private instructions or to attempt zazen herself. This event, however, had so fired the imaginations of herself, her mother, and her two sisters that they all began to devote themselves regularly to zazen. The Roshi had assigned Yaeko the koan mu, instructing her to absorb herself in it continuously even while lying in bed. With her father's death and the soul-searching it provoked, her zazen and overall concern with Buddhism took on a fresh and profound sense of urgency. HARADA-ROSHI's lengthy commentary on Dogen's Shibogenzo she read 17 times, devouring every word, and while yet far from strong she undertook zazen sitting in the traditional Japanese position, alternating it with the lotus posture. By now the worst stages of her tuberculosis had passed and she was no longer required to remain in bed. However, the disease had left its marks on her already delicate constitution and she was urged by her doctor to convalesce in sunny Kamakura, where her family maintained a villa. In this new seclusion she was able to lose herself more and more in zazen, turning her back forever on the interests which had once been meaningful to her. So eager was she in her pursuit of the Buddha's way that she begged HARADA-ROSHI to come to Kamakura to continue his lectures and private instructions. Seeing in her uncommon ardor and devotion a rare spirit, he made the trip regularly each month specially to guide her, as did from time to time Yasutani Roshi and Taji Roshi, two of HARADA-ROSHI's most respected disciples. Some 5 years elapsed from the time she began zazen in bed until her first kensho on December 22, 1935. In the succeeding days, as these letters vividly reveal, her mind's eye opened fully in a flood of light and understanding. Her ensuing rapture, her discovery that even perfect enlightenment adds nothing one does not already have, and therefore this ecstasy is a kind of madness. This together with HARADA-ROSHI's joyous recognition of her bodhisattvic spirit and his gentle reproach for her smell of enlightenment afford an intimate insight, as rare as it is illuminating, into the complex and seemingly contradictory enlightenment process. To die as Yaeko did, with a presentiment of death a week before, with no pain, and with utter serenity, is, as HARADA-ROSHI points out, an aim of all Buddhists, albeit one to which few attain. That Yaeko could achieve it is the measure of the extraordinarily high level of consciousness to which she had risen, and of her pureness of faith, courage, and perseverance which made it possible. Who can read HARADA-ROSHI's poignant account of his last hours with her and not be moved by her dauntless spirit and utter selflessness? The physician who witnessed her death, which technically he attributed to pneumonia, recalled, "Never have I seen anyone die so beautifully." But perhaps the greatest tribute to her memory was paid at Hosshin-ji at the first session which fell after her death. Toward the end of it HARADA-ROSHI, in tears, recounted to the 90 or so participants the incidents of Yaeko's heroic struggle for self-fulfillment and its magnificent consummation. Such was its effect that by the end of the session more than 20 persons, an unprecedented number, had passed the first gate of enlightenment. These letters first appeared in an article by HARADA-ROSHI in a Buddhist magazine soon after the death of Yaeko Iwasaki. His remarks were jotted down by him on the letters as he received them. But the general comments and the titles were added by him specifically for the article, to instruct the reader in Buddhism as much as to clarify the letters themselves. Yaeko, of course, had no opportunity to see these comments before her passing. About a year later this same material was included in a book called Yaezakura, which is a brief account of Yaeko's life printed privately by the Iwasaki family as a memorial to her in December 1937. It is from this book that the present translation was made. All bracketed matter within both the letters and HARADA-ROSHI's comments is the translator's. A biographical note on Harada-Roshi. Sogaku Harada, to whom Yaeko Iwasaki's letters are addressed and whose comments accompany them, died December 12, 1961, at the age of 91. At his funeral service, next to his photograph, hung a piece of calligraphy written by him several years earlier. For 40 years I've been selling water by the bank of a river. Ho, ho. My labors have been wholly without merit. These typically Zen lines are a fitting epitaph, for no Japanese Zen master in modern times strove more arduously to teach his students that there is nothing to learn than Harada-Roshi. His 14 Dharma successors and innumerable enlightened disciples and followers throughout Japan bear witness that his efforts, if without merit, have by no means been in vain. Nominally of the Soto sect, he welded together the best of Soto and Rinzai, and the resulting amalgam was a vibrant Buddhism which has become one of the great teaching lines in Japan today. Probably more than anyone else in his time he revitalized, through his profound spiritual insight, the teachings of Dogen Zenji, which had been steadily drained of their vigor through the shallow understanding of priests and scholars of the Soto sect in whose hands their exposition had hitherto rested. His commentary on Shushogi, a codification of Dogen's Shibogenzo, is recognized as one of the most penetrating of its kind. Hosshin-ji, Harada-Roshi's monastery on the Japan Sea. Drenched by incessant rains, blanketed by frequent snowstorms, and rocked by unprecedentedly severe discipline from within, came to be known as the harshest Zen monastery in all Japan, and Harada-Roshi himself as the most exacting of Zen taskmasters. More than once he refused invitations to head monasteries in Bamiya districts of Japan, contending that this rigorous climate helped to drive people's minds into the pit of their bellies, where ultimately they would find the secret of the universe. Men and women by the hundreds flocked to Hosshin-ji in its heyday, drawn by the Roshi's extraordinary power to inspire and lead them to self-awakening. Like all masters of high spiritual development, he was the keenest judge of character. He was as quick to expose pretense and sham as he was to detect it. Exceptional students he drove mercilessly, exacting from them the best of which they were capable. From all he demanded as a sine qua non sincerity and absolute adherence to his teaching, brooking not the slightest deviation. Casual observers often found him rigid and narrow, but disciples and students who were faithful to his teachings knew him to be wise and compassionate. For all his sternness, Harada-Roshi had his gentle side. And though he never married but remained a monk in the true sense of the word, he loved to romp with children and was exceedingly fond of animals, particularly dogs. Thoroughly grounded in both the Soto and the Rinzai doctrines and disciplines, Harada-Roshi was eminently fitted to teach an integral Zen. At the age of 7 he entered Soto temple life as a novitiate monk and continued his Soto training in several temples throughout his primary and high school years. At 20, in the face of his Soto advisor's persistent opposition, he became a monk at Shogenji, in its time a great Rinzai monastery, as he had been unable to find a deeply enlightened master in the Soto sect. After 2.5 years of strenuous training there, he attained Kensho, but his enlightenment still fell short of total liberation. At 27, by his father's insistence that he obtain more formal education, he quit Shogenji and enrolled in the Soto-sponsored Komazawa University, continuing for a further 6 years after his graduation to do research in Buddhism under well-known scholars. But while his knowledge of Buddhism grew, it did not bring him the emancipation he longed for. He decided, therefore,